Hi all, this is my second video about my experience finding my two past lives. If you haven't watched the first video, I strongly suggest you view it first, because in order to save time, I won't be going into explaining things which were already explained in the first video. Also, you should know that the book titled Seauba the Golden Planet is the source of my knowledge about reincarnation, meaning of life, and other things that I will be mentioning in this video. I have some proof on my channel why that book is true and how I know it. The knowledge and experience which I shared in my first video about my Vivien Leigh life was of high importance in determining that I was actually Michel Avila also in my past life. It's important to know that because while there was a book written about Michel Avila's murder case, there isn't as much information about Missy as there is about Vivien Leigh. And so it means that we have to use some other means in determining that I was actually Michel Avila in my past life. After I had found many synchronicities with Michel Avila and Vivien Leigh, I was able to find the evidence that I was Vivien Leigh in one of my past lives. Of course, it meant that the synchronicities which I had with Vivien Leigh meant that I was Vivien and I lived that life. So, it was logical to question if my synchronicities with Michel Avila were also caused by the same thing, me being her in my very last past life. To start with, I'd like to talk about the importance of certain dreams in helping us find out our past life. As you may know from my first video, there is such a thing as a true dream. As the name suggests, such a dream tells you the truth about someone or something. It was a true dream in which I said in Vivien Leigh's voice that I was the actress Vivien Leigh in my past life. And that experience made me search the proof that it was a true dream and that I was actually the actress Vivien Leigh. I did find that proof. I've had several true dreams which showed me that I was Michel Avila also in my past life. I'll talk about those dreams later in this video. The same principles apply as with Vivien Leigh's reincarnation case. If I was Michel Avila, and the dreams I had were true dreams, it meant I would find matches in psychology with Missy. I would find suffering for errors made in my Vivien Leigh life. I would find identical spiritual knowledge which I have in my current life, and which I either had or gained in my Vivien Leigh life. And of course, I would find even more synchronicities with my current life and with my Vivien Leigh life. And since this video exists, it means that I found all that, proving to me that I was Michel Avila. And of course, also presenting to me even more proof that I was Vivien Leigh. Missy has lived 17 years and there's not a lot of information to be found about her. People who knew her are silent about my questions, which is happening actually, not just because of skepticism, but also because Facebook puts messages from unknown people into a folder not many will bother to check, provided they even know such a folder exists. As such, the majority of evidence here will come in the form of true dreams and synchronicities. And I'll note something I forgot to mention in my intro video I recorded a long time ago. When I started realizing that synchronicities with Vivien Leigh proved to be related to reincarnation, I also thought that my synchronicities with Michel Avila could probably exist for the same reason, reincarnation. As I thought that, I've heard a lot of knocks near me in my room. The clock showed 33 minutes when that happened. Those knocks clearly weren't caused by changes in the temperature or anything else related to the environment. It's actually been a long time since I noticed that I hear a knock in the kitchen when I think of something correctly. It's a long story. I attribute this knocking activity to my higher self. We know from Seauba that higher selves are constantly monitoring us, and then can disable a car if otherwise would be dead in a catastrophe. And it's not yet our time to die. So surely they can produce a knock nearby if it will give us a sign we're on the right track. Later I had another true dream. I was in a dungeon of Dark and Darker video game. There was a young woman near me, to whom I told about my plan to try and ask my higher self to create a mirror on a wall and then change the body I had in the dream to that which I had in my very last past life. Once I said that, I did just that. I saw Michel Avila in the mirror's reflection of me, and I stated that fact out loud. Then I asked my higher self to change my body in the dream to that which I had in my past life before last. I saw Vivien Leigh in the reflection and I stated that fact out loud. It doesn't matter right now what happened next in the dream. At that time, I already had all the proof that I was Vivien Leigh. So, the fact that I saw myself as Vivien Leigh in the mirror showed me that that portion of the dream was true. And, of course, it was logical to assume that the portion with Michele Avila was also part of a true dream. But there was another dream, which may also have been true. In that dream, I was a young woman with slightly dark skin. There were several other girls near me. When I was walking out of the house, I suddenly turned around and said, "I love you, Mom," to the emptiness of the second floor of the house. The importance of this is that those words were uttered by Michele Avila on the day she was killed, and it was unusual for her to do such a thing. Later, I realized that the prior scene of the dream is connected to another dream, a dream in a dream I had many years earlier, and which, as it now turns out, must have been a true dream also. Both dreams had scenes with logs, and in the first one, it meant I needed to pay attention to what was about to happen next. The significance here is that the dream in a dream was probably referring to the life of Cleopatra, in which several serious crimes were committed. And I think that in my Missy's life, I paid for one of them in the way I died. Then there was another dream, which essentially hinted me that I already had my answer, but I was still asking questions. It was referring to Michel Avila. In another dream, I was wondering how it all happened that I found my two lives. It was as if finding a needle in a haystack. This is actually very important, and I did talk about that in my previous video about Vivien Leigh. It's not about chances. It's about what we have to learn and experience in our current life based on our past decisions and actions, which of course include those done in our past lives. On January 27, 2024, I had a dream in which I was near what seemed to be a bust of a woman with large breasts. It's possible it was the dark-haired woman from another dream, in which I asked my higher self to change my body to the one I had in another life. Later, I'd confirmed many times it was Cleopatra VII. I know that the appearance is different from the statues some people attribute to her, and there could be several reasons for that. Also, for this video, it's not that important to delve into this question. A white dress with either colorless or transparent or whitish gemstones was put on top of the bust. On the bust's right breast was written a name which was then erased. I couldn't remember it, but I think it contained only one word. Emma Hamilton was written on that spot instead. On the bust's left breast there was written Vivien Leigh. Michel Avila was written below Emma, and Evgeny Meshkov was written below Vivien. At the time, I knew that Vivien, Michel, and Evgeny are people who have been inhabited by the same soul. The dream was showing me that I actually was Emma Hamilton too. But it's also important for this video because once again I had confirmation that I was Michel Avila. During one night I asked my higher self to show me a portion of my very last past life. In a dream I saw myself writing Missy on a blank paper. It just so happens Missy had written a poem that starts with the word Missy. The fact that I have in my life several reflections with Vivien Leigh's movies was the major proof for me, indicating that I was actually that person in my past life. And I was not at all surprised to discover a couple of reflections in Michel Avila's life with Vivien Leigh's movies and plays. Broken Bottle in A Streetcar Named Desire is reflected in Karen Severson threatening Michelle with a broken bottle. I'll note that in the movie, my character wanted to use the bottle for protection, but then Blanche says quite scary things describing what she'd do with the bottle to Stanley's eyes. Hamlet. Ophelia drowning in a creek. A tree branch is also present. I always thought why it had to be drowning in a stream, that I had to pay for some of my errors, in my Michel Avila's life. The body was pinned down by a log too. Laurence Olivier writes in his book how Vivien and he made love almost in front of his wife Jill during Ophel's production in Elsinore. It was clearly a serious mistake. Missy wrote that she feared windy days. Unfortunately, no one who knew Missy has told me why exactly that was the case, but it obviously reminded me of Gone with the Wind. I also remember one peculiar episode from my life. I was walking near Izmailova Hotel. Maybe it was 2008 or 2007, and out of the blue a very strong wind started blowing at me, and I started having difficulties breathing. I actually felt like I could suffocate, which was strange, and I actually had to run to get out of that highly windy spot. And after that, I'd avoid that place for some time. There was a peculiar event which happened in our village when we were kids. We dug out two stones, black and grey, and some short time later a black and grey clouds came out of nowhere, bringing strong winds along with them. We decided to bury the rocks back in the ground, and the wind was gone. I don't know what was the reason for the appearance of those clouds, and it's possible it was a synchronized event, meaning that the rocks don't possess any properties which can make such clouds to appear. From what I know, Michele Avila never slept with anyone's boyfriends, and yet she was accused of doing that by Karen and Laura. In fact, Missy was beaten up by girls who believed Karen's lies. It means in that life I was suffering for the error I'd made in my previous life or lives. We know that, sadly, sleeping with other women's boyfriends and husbands is exactly what Vivien Leigh did in her life. I won't go into the details. You can learn about them from various biographies. The point here is that it's another match between two lives, which are supposed to be incarnations of the same soul. During the filming of Ship of Fools, Vivien Leigh found herself hammering Lee Marvin's face for real with her spiked heel. It was an error which could have been paid for in Missy's life when girls beat her up because of Karen's lies. Laurence Olivier writes in his Confessions of an Actor that Vivien tore her mother's breast in a fit of fury. She was badly hurt, Larry wrote, but Gertrude forgave her daughter. It's possible it's not related, but I just remember how Mrs. earring was torn from her ear and her teeth were broken. Of course, Gertrude had to live with injuries till the rest of her life, while in Mrs. life I died shortly after sustaining those injuries. I will note that the error might have continued to be paid for in my current life too. I've got some scars. Missy and Victor were friends, but they occasionally slept together as part of their friendship. This goes in line with what I did in my Vivien's life, and who knows what I would have done in my current life if I didn't start being afraid of speech because of stammer. Based on what habits I've got, and the fact I did have sexual fantasies about some of my female friends, I'd say I could have done a similar thing had life been different. I'll note that sleeping together while not being in a relationship in which you're ready to potentially have children and live together as a family is an error, as I now understand. And it can be an additional reason for why I have to live in this life alone. Missy loved the ocean when she was a little girl. Then she got caught in a strong undertow. She had nightmares she'd drown in the ocean after that incident. In my Vivien Leigh's life, I could swim in the ocean for hours apparently. Missy loved the ocean as a little girl. All checks out. Also, I have had some fear of deep water, and ocean is certainly falls under the definition. Vivien flirted with some males, and Missy was said to be a big flirt. Vivien Leigh, Michele Avila and myself are not huge fans of needles and shots. During the hearing, Karen mentioned Michelle would go partying, just noting that Vivien liked that too. As for me, Stammer and resulting fear of speech were the barriers to discover if I like partying in this life or not. Some people say Missy barely wore any makeup. In this life, I thought that girls give too much attention to makeup, hiding the truth behind it, rather than working on developing themselves. Also, Missy wore simple clothes. This reminded me of my interview in Vivien Leigh's life, mentioning I was not paying attention to the fashion, and I was wearing the clothes that suited me. If Missy had made a promise, then she'd stick to it. In Vivien's life, I'd usually be on time for work and rehearsals in theater. In this life, I also try to be on time. Loyalty and sticking to promises connects to me too. Missy and her brother had night talks with Irene for several years. In my childhood, I'd call my mother to come near me and talk to me about different things before going to sleep. It was usually quite dark in the room, with maybe just the TV and kitchen lights reflecting from the walls. Karen Kingsbury writes in her book that Missy wanted to help Laura Doyle get over her breakup with Victor Amaya, and maybe even help them reunite. And then Missy writes in a poem that she was someone who gives friendship, advice, and second chances. I remember clearly how in my youth I tried to help my village friend, even so by that time he'd been calling me a certain name because of my stuttering, which had already started to cause me serious problems and suffering in my life. I still somehow forgave him. I was given friendship, advice, and second chances. Missy looked forward to the first day of school. She woke up before dawn that day and dressed up before Irene, her mother, was even awake. In this life, due to stammer, I felt kinda uneasy to go to school. But by contrast, when I was not having issues with my speech, I actually enjoyed going to school to the point that I was looking forward to waking up for school. During my English classes, which I took when I was 19, I thought to myself once how I'd enjoy school if only there was no stammer in my life. Missy describes herself as impatient. In Vivien's life, I was often described as impatient, and it describes me also. Missy is said to have been too trusting. Several trust-related mistakes have been done in my life. Missy was too sensitive. Her friends mattered too much to her. This relates to Vivien Leigh. As for me, perhaps during the last moments of my last past life, I realized a thing or two about life. It means that friends mattered also to me in my current life. But when it was clear they talk some negative things about me behind my back, I was okay to live without them. It was the error I made in my last past life of Missy, giving too many second chances to Karen and Laura, who eventually killed me. Missy is said to have been too trusting, and that she wanted everyone to like her at her school. And it seemed that almost everyone did. Missy was happy and vivacious, which made it easy to like her. But I should note that there also exist opposite opinions. This could relate to Psyche, but I tend to think that it probably relates to the lack of certain spiritual knowledge. Because in my life there were times when I felt the same thing, as if I wanted everyone to like me. And that was actually one of the reasons why at first it was so darn difficult for me to reveal the truth about my Saub-related experiences. For I knew that many people would think I'm crazy. Then I realized that I, as if, wanted everyone to treat me nicely. But I also realized that it was impossible. And so eventually I started to care less and less about other people's negative opinions. Actually, this is another connection to my Synchronicities with It and A Nightmare on Elm Street movies. The finally revealed theme of that experience of mine was, regardless my now almost gone fear of what negative things other people might think of me. There's a couple of spiritual knowledge connections that I could see. Vivien tried to repair a friendship with Beaton. Missy could give second chances. I've also unblocked some people, giving them a second chance. And generally I talked to people who were somewhat rude to me when we were kids. Missy didn't like life to be unfair. She became friends with Karen, who, from what is written, it seems like not many wanted to play with. In my life, I tried helping a friend from village who was calling me bad words because of my stammer. In Vivien's wife, I was also friendly, but I also made some mistakes. When I was reading Karen Kingsbury's book about Missy's murder, I continued to discover a lot more synchronicities with Michele Avila, which is, of course, what should be expected if I truly was Michel Avila. I'll mention some of those synchronicities here. Vivien Leigh was awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame on February 8, 1960. Michel Avila was born on February 8, 1968, exactly 8 years later. I'll note that number 8 has appeared a lot in my synchronistic experience. Lee Holman, Vivien Leigh's first husband, died on February 8, 1982. He was 81 years old. It was 14 years after Michelle was born, and that number does appear in several of my wives also. Deadly Women's Season 4 Episode 18 is about Michel Avila. That episode aired on January 13, 2012. It was Friday. This comes as no big surprise because on Friday 13th of January, but in different years, I signed the contract to star in Gone with the Wind in Vivien's Life. Approached to get acquainted with Marina in Moscow when I was 28, and it marked the end of my 14-year period of going down in my current life. This was an important moment in my life, after which I was able to achieve some personal success and regained my health. And it's actually due to that event that I was able to translate Xiaobo prophecy into Russian language, and then I also wrote my own book about my wife's experiences with Xiaobo. It would take a lot of time to explain all the details, but those two events in my two different lives are actually equally important, and both of them had a dramatic effect on my life. So both of them are actually very important. My mother wrote in her diary that I recited poems, and at 4 I wrote my own, and continued doing it in later years. Missy wrote poems. I learned that Mr. Bowen, the person in whose YouTube video I found out about Missy, was born on October 1st, 1988, which is exactly 3 years after I died in Michel Avila's life. I was also born in 1988, 63 days earlier, on 30th of July. I will add that his name, Jonathan, means Yahweh has given in Hebrew, and Yahweh is Xiaoba, from what I read on Tom Choko's website, and according to what he says Michel de Marquet has told him. One of the poems I wrote actually gave me chills when I first read it several months ago. I didn't remember writing it because I was so little then. I wrote about my budgie Katie, who was riding on a bicycle, and when the bridge went up, she cried out for help, but nobody heard her, and she fell down into the water. But, as Little Me wrote, Katie could swim, and she swam to the Kremlin. Karen Kingsbury, in her book about Missy's murder, mentions Eva's nightmare, in which Missy was screaming for help with nobody hearing her before she was killed. And Missy did actually scream in real life while being drowned. On July 25th, 1988, 5 days before my birth, Eva Chirombo has decided to tell the truth and calls her brother Jack, whose father is a police officer. He told her that he'd meet her at her apartment at about 5:15. 5:15 or 17:15 was the exact time that I was born on July 30th, 1988. The mystery about my passing in my last life was finally officially revealed the next day, on July 26, 1988, ending the search which lasted for 3 years, and my new life would start 4 days later. When I saw the stop asynchronicity, I was softly crying, looking for my birth tag, showing the time of my new birth. There are many other synchronicities and other connections between my current wife and my two past wives. I will show them all after the main video is over. If you're researching reincarnation, that information may be of value for your studies. I will warn you so that I was writing down everything that I thought could relate to reincarnation. Because there's so little knowledge about this subject at this moment, it's more than possible that not everything that I noted in my files may relate to reincarnation. Some things may be just coincidences, or missing links where none exist. Still, as you might have seen, I have clear connections to my past life in which I was Vivien Leigh, which is the proof that such things as synchronicities and other types of similarities between two different lives can manifest in your life because you were that person. In my synchronicity video, I actually didn't think that I was Michele Avila and Vivien Leigh in my past lives. I only thought about it as one of possible reasons for my experience. And I actually was more inclined to think that those synchronicities meant something else. I thought I was just having some interesting experience with synchronicities. But now that it's proven I was Vivien and Michelle in my past lives after all, one of the reasons for my death in Missy's life became clear also. I made errors in my past lives, and due to inexorable universal law, I had to pay the penalty in such a way. I think that it's clear from various legitimate sources that Michel Avila wasn't sleeping with anyone's boyfriends. But, sadly, it's also known from other legitimate sources that I was doing exactly that in my Vivien Leigh life. Why it had to be murder, you may ask? Well, I've only started researching reincarnation. But from the information that I've gathered, it seems to me that perhaps many different events from different times and lives may find their consequence in a single compound event. Long time ago, before I even knew about Michel Avila's existence, I had a dream which could also be true. The main idea of that dream was that I had to live with my mother because I killed her in another life. I was crying in that dream when it was revealed to me, because at the time I was a rather spiritual person. I was sharing and studying self-help book, and in general I didn't like violence. Anyway, if that dream was true, it could somehow relate to why I had to be murdered in my last past life also. And then in my Vivien Leigh's life, during the filming of Gone with the Wind, I was playing a game called... Obviously, even though it was a game, it was still an error in the eyes of the universe. And that also might have played a role in why it had to be murder. Of course, I've also lived other lives before, as was hinted in one of my dreams. And it's possible that the errors which I probably did in those lives could also be reasons for my death in my last life. The next question is why it had to be drowning. As you know, there's a reflection in my Vivien Leigh life playing Ophelia, and how I died in my Michelle's life. Ophelia died by drowning in a creek, and as Laurence Olivier writes in his autobiography, while there, he and Vivien were making life almost within Jill's vision. Jill was his wife at the time. Karen Severson and Ward Doyle falsely accused Missy of sleeping with their boyfriends. But, unfortunately, that mistake was indeed made in the past life. And it should also be noted that Vivien Leigh cheated on her two husbands and was also sleeping with people who had partners. I'd like to think that I learned my lesson. In this life, after finding Selbo prophecy and after suffering by being lonely and without a girlfriend, let alone wife or family, I realized even more the importance of properly finding the partner with whom you have love and spiritual affinity. And, of course, I know the importance of being faithful. In the end, I would like to say that in an unusual turn of events, and thanks to me finding my Vivien Leigh life, I might have found even more of my past lives. I will try to tell you about them, in case I'll get the evidence I was those people. For now, it has to be in the form of true dreams, since those lives are distant and there's not a lot of information about many of them. I know that it may seem incredible, and unfortunately, me finding so many of my lives will probably make certain people doubt my wife's story. Even so, I provide the evidence, and many of it is publicly available. But it is what it is. If anything, it will be another opportunity for me to learn to speak any truth about myself, and also to continue learning not to give a damn about what some skeptics may be thinking of me. And in general, live my life as happy as I can. The time has come to say goodbye. All the best to you.